Welcome to Study Isaiah, the podcast where we examine the language, context, and meaning of the book of Isaiah with Dr. Paul Wegner. I'm Tyler Sanders. Across from me is Paul Wegner, who's going to tell us the Hebrew word of the day.
Oh, and I have a really good one today.
All right.
And you've probably heard it. Haram is from a king's harem.
Yeah.
So this is haram, and it means something that's dedicated to something.
Okay.
So haram can be dedicated to a king. So he has a harem. It has a little different pointing, but it's the same related word.
Yeah.
But it often means devoted to destruction. Do you remember Jericho? Was the first city they came into, and it was haram. It was devoted to God for destruction.
Okay.
Put under a ban to give something to God. All right? And in 34, verse 2, it says, "For the Lord's indignation is against all the nations, and his wrath against all their enemies. He has utterly destroyed them." That's our word. He has given them over to slaughter.
Wow.
So it's dedicated to destruction, basically.
Well, let me ask you something. This is making me think a little bit about, this is a little bit of a language question. I probably should know the answer already since I took you for Hebrew.
That's all right.
So as you have the definition up here, it's kind of in a verb form.
Yeah.
But it also takes it can be used or the root can be used as like a noun or even as an adjective, it sounded like maybe?
In Hebrew, with different pointings, it usually makes it a noun, and often Hebrew has three root radicals, basically. So the root radicals will be basically the same, but you can put different pointing on it, and it'll have slightly different nuances, and one can be a verb, one can be a noun.
Yeah, those will shift around.
Yeah.
Okay.
So basically you can make a noun out of that word by putting segols under it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so in our verse 34:2, when it says it's translated, he has utterly destroyed. So it's kind of takes almost a past tense kind of meaning here, but it's,
yes. And it's because it's the verb form and it's in a perfect form.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That's great.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
let's get into the text.
So that gives you some hint of what this passage is going to be
tell
about.
Tell me about it. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay. So chapter 34 is okay. Let's look at the big structure a minute.
Okay.
Remember we had the little apocalypse on the other side of our palistrophe.
That's right.
This one is matching it, and I when I first looked at this, I couldn't figure out why do we got two passages that both are talking about this future time, and then I think I realized that it has this palistrophe structure, and so it balances each other. And remember last week we talked about the middle section, which was that really big section that had those woe oracles balanced by the restoration.
Right.
So that's in the middle, and now we're going outside of that again, or on the other side, and now we've got our final judgments and restoration.
So what we went over last time was Isaiah 28 to 33. That all matches up. And basically what you're saying is what we're going over today, Isaiah 34, 35, it corresponds to Isaiah 24 to 27, right? That's the kind of connection we're seeing?
Yep.
The little apocalypse, as we called it?
Yep.
Yeah.
And then remember, that also means that the outside ones match, but it's unusual how it matches. Do you remember my thing was the oracle to the Assyrians was the smallest one in chapter 14?
Yeah.
And I think it's the most important because it actually, in it says, this has already happened, and it's the same thing that God's going to do to the rest of the nations if they disobey God.
Right.
And so the Assyrians are talked about here. We're going to talk about God's punishment of the Assyrians later. So that's how those two match.
Yeah, yeah. And so for today, for 34 and 35, that does that a thematic kind of match up with the little apocalypse?
Actually,
is there textual things that are kind of similar across the two, or is it
well,
mostly...
it's pretty much themes.
Okay.
Both of them talking about the future. Now, it's interesting. It's got most scholars call it a diptych pattern, and what it means is that
in 34 and 35.
Yeah. That 34 is talking about the destruction, 35 is talking about the restoration, and so in that sense they parallel each other, and they're just opposite, but they match each other in that everything's talking about the destruction in the one and restoration in the other, and so they pull it together and use it. They call it a diptych pattern.
Yeah.
And basically, it's like an ancient writing tablet. My picture here is of a Roman one where they have wax inside. They take the little pen and mark, they write inside there. Then they close it, send it to the receiver, and he opens it up and he can read what's been scratched into the wax.
Yeah.
Then what happens is they take something hot, smooth it over. He can write his letter, fold it back up, and send it to the guy or the whoever
original,
he wants.
yeah. Okay.
So that's how they worked, and it's called a diptych pattern because they have two matching sides.
I see.
Yeah.
So in real life, there was this kind of device
Yeah.
that also was called a diptych?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, it's called it's a Roman tablet, but
Yeah.
but it's they call it, they describe it as a diptych.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And in this, metaphorically, as we describe it,
Yeah.
we're really saying like there's these two chapters, I guess, or sections, that really correspond directly one back and forth,
Yeah.
but almost opposite ways.
Yes.
Is that kind of how they relate to each other?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's still talking about the whole world, those kind of things. It's still talking about a future time, but one's judgment, one's restoration.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay?
Well, let's get into it.
All right. If we look at verses 1 and 2, draw near, O nations, to hear, listen, O people, let the earth and all that it contains hear, and the earth here and the world and all that springs from it. For the Lord's indignation is against all the nations. I was going to use that word indignation as our Hebrew word for the day, but it's just the word wrath or anger or something like that. So it wasn't as interesting as I thought that word harem was. Sorry.
Yeah.
For his wrath is against their enemies, and he has utterly destroyed them. There's our word.
And that's it, haram.
Yeah. And he has given them over to slaughter, so that the slain will be thrown out, the corpses will give off their stench, and the mountains will be drenched with their blood. This it's really gory, but it's talking about the destruction that God's going to pour out on them. Yeah. So that's how it starts, and you can see I've called it major destruction because it's wiping out the whole world. It sounds like, and he is just slaughtering them. It sounds like.
Yeah.
Okay. Then in verse 5. He even talks about the heavens. So look at what it says in verse 5. For my sword is satiated in the heaven. Behold, it is descended from judgment upon Edom and upon the people that I have devoted to destruction. There's that word again, haram.
Oh, really? Devoted to destruction? Oh, right.
Yeah. But so he's talking about he's done his slaughtering up in the heavens, and then he's going to do it down in Edom. Do you remember we had a passage in the little apocalypse that talked about he's going to judge the people in the heavens or the hosts of heavens and on the earth, the kings on the earth. Yeah. I think this is matching that same kind of thing.
Right.
So it's saying there's going to be judgment throughout his whole creation.
Yeah.
Okay? All right, then verse 8. For the Lord has a day of vengeance, a year of recompense for the cause of Zion. Now, two things I want to point out. Notice that it's only a day of vengeance. That's a shorter time than the year of recompense. Okay? So I think it's nice to know that God's judgment is temporary. His day of recompense is a lot longer.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And then notice it says, for the cause of Zion. So that suggests that it's happening for Zion's benefit, for their, because God wants them to be blessed. So this is a judgment or recompense because of what people have done to them. So that's given us some help to know what this whole thing is about. But notice also in that verse we read in verse 5, notice it's pointing out Edom.
Right.
That
is specific.
Yeah. So I think we talked about this before. Moab and Edom are two of the kind of classic enemies of God's people. Yeah. And so last time Moab was being wiped out. This time Edom is being wiped out. And I think there's some logic as to why these countries were chosen. Remember, they were related to Israel and yet didn't treat Israel well.
Yeah.
And so I think that's probably what's going on. So it's the idea that you should have favor or kindness toward your relative, but you don't.
Yeah.
And I think that's why these two specific countries have been picked out to be punished severely.
And is Edom filling in? Is this kind of...
I think so.
Yeah,
I think
it's
ultimately
not only Edom we're talking about in a way. They're kind of almost...
A picture.
Yeah. Right.
And I think you got that because remember when the judgment was talked about, it was on the whole earth.
Yeah.
Well, Edom doesn't live everywhere.
Right.
And so I think that's how we know that it's got to be a kind of figurative of more than that.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
All right, so that's the first part. Then we get to verse 16 and 17.
Oh no, we skipped all the animals.
Oh, well, go ahead and we can talk about them. You're right.
I just thought it was interesting, starting in verse 11 through 15, really right before we get here. There's just a ton of animals that get referenced in here, and they're so specific.
Yeah, like
Almost
pelican, hedgehog.
Got a hedgehog in here.
Yeah.
Owls and ravens, ostriches. So, and a hairy goat.
Yeah.
That's always a great addition that comes up from time to time.
And
So
I know you were going to ask me about that night monster.
Yeah, and there's a night monster is listed in here as well. So I guess let's keep the night monster question.
Oh,
as a
okay, hang on to that
specific
one.
one. Yeah, let's get that. But I wanted to know, like, how specific, what's happening when we're seeing all these animals in this passage?
Yeah.
Are they, is there really like a Hebrew word for hedgehog, or is that kind of just somehow some kind of reference, like a ground creature or something like that?
Yeah. Well, I think they're trying to be as specific as they can. Now, first of all, we're in poetry, so what they're doing is they're just heaping up the different names, and some of these we have no idea what the animals are, but they're narrowing down to that they can get pretty specific. Like in like when they go through the words, sometimes they can tell it dwells on the ground and it dwells in bushes, or if it's a bird, it flies in the sky and it lives in a tree and stuff like that. So it can narrow down some of the parameters on some of these words. So they're probably fairly close to what they are, but we might not have the exact animal.
Yeah.
And really, it probably doesn't matter, because what it's getting at is most of this is talking about these are wild animals that are going to come and live in a place that's been destroyed.
Yeah.
And so that's the real thing it's getting at.
Yeah.
But I think most of these, they can get pretty narrowed down and get pretty close. Now, until we get to that night monster.
Yeah.
That night monster, it's built off the word Lila for night. And in fact, that's basically what it says, the night. And so they had to figure out, okay, what's it getting at? So I'm not sure night monster is the best translation, but some kind of a creature of the night or some animal that dwells in the night is probably just fine.
Yeah.
Whether it's really a creature, I have no idea, or a monster, I have no idea.
Yeah. Okay, well, now that we've taken my excursion,
All right.
we can get back to where you were headed.
All right, let's go to verses 16 and 17, because it's got some interesting things. Look what it says. Seek from the book of the Lord and read. Not one of these will be missing, none will lack its mate, for his mouth has commanded and his spirit has gathered them. So the first thing I wanted to point out is when it says from the book of the Lord. So it actually knows that this is going to be recorded, and so that it knows it's going to be in the book of the Lord, so that they can actually go back and check it in time when this starts to happen. They can actually see it and actually say, "Oh, God knew about this before it actually happened." So I think that's what that's getting at. So when it says "seek in the book of the Lord," so go back to where it's been recorded, and he says, and that not a mate is going to be missing. So he says, I think what he's getting at is that it's happening exactly how God had told you it was going to happen. So it's real specific
complete.
in saying, that there's not an element of it that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And so I think it's intended to be that specific on that.
Yeah.
And then the second part, and he casts a lot for them, and his hand is divided to them by line. And so we're wondering, well, what's this cast them a lot and by line? Well, the next verse kind of helps let you know what that means, or the next part of it. They will possess it forever, from generation to generation they shall dwell in it. Remember back at that time when they drew lots for land? And so the Israelites, remember when the land was divided up, to remember that's how they got it, is they cast lots and then they knew who got what land. And, who was the next one to get
Yeah.
land? And I think that's what's going on here. I think they're saying that he cast lots for them, so he's given them a specific land, and they're going to get it. And then it talks about he's divided it to them by line, being measured out so that they know exactly what area they get. And once again, that would be like back in the Israel's time when they measured out the land that people owned. They would almost like we do today. They would put markers on the edge so you'd know,
you know where the boundary line is.
And then remember, it was one of the biggest curses in the Old Testament is for people that moved boundary markers, and that's throughout the ancient Near East. There's always curses on the people that move boundary markers, because that's something that's basically like stealing land, right?
Right.
You're going out and let's say your boundary
Which is
marker
passed
is
down
here.
to your family, and
Yeah.
like it's
Exactly. So you had a boundary marker there. If you moved it, that means you've got less land now. Somebody else has more.
Yeah.
So it's like stealing your land.
That was actually in my Old Testament class. I didn't have you for Old Testament.
Oh.
I had Dr. Arbino.
Oh, okay.
But he said that. He said when you read Genesis, something that like probably modern readers don't always think about, but a good
Yeah.
question to ask is like, what's happening with the land? Who's
Yeah.
inheriting the land? Who gets it? That's a
Yeah.
good thing. That shows up a lot. And so like, if you're not looking for it, you may
You miss it.
just throw it away or kind of think like, I don't know, I don't get it, or this doesn't really
Yeah.
mean anything to me or my life right now.
Yeah.
But that's a key question. And I think it's very important to keep that in mind. You know,
Yeah.
that's a course would be vital for
For
your family wealth,
That's
and
right.
well-being, and
Exactly.
Yeah.
You could starve if you didn't have the
Right.
right amount of land.
Yeah.
So.
So this is a resetting of that in a way, do you think, or
No.
it's kind of like this is the future?
Yeah, and it's just talking about that the world is going to be given over to. Remember, he's going to destroy it.
Yeah.
That means the wild animals are going to take over at it.
Oh,
So
I
that's
see.
basically, and that's it says from generation to generation they'll dwell in it. So that means it's going to now be that punishment is going to exist for a long time.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's the judgment part.
Yeah.
Okay. So now the next part is in chapter 35. That's the restoration part. Okay. And it's specifically to Zion, and we need to talk about that a minute. But let's read it first. So in verse 35:1, it says, "The wilderness and the desert will be glad. The Arabah will rejoice and blossom like the crocus, and it will blossom profusely, rejoice with rejoicing and shout with joy." Oh, let me just stop. I know you're going to ask me, is that crocus really a crocus? And the answer to that is, I don't know. There's some translations that talk about it being a wild rose or something like that.
Okay.
So what we do have are the areas: wilderness, desert, Arabah. Remember, the Arabah was the southern
Yeah.
part of Israel. That was the dry part. But it's saying that it's going to rejoice and blossom like the
Yeah.
crocus. So it means if you were in Israel today in that Arabah area, it's like sand and rocks. That's it.
Yeah.
But what this is saying is that there's going to come a time when that's going to blossom profusely.
Yeah.
So that's part of that image of a restoration.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. The glory of Lebanon will be given to it, the majesty of Carmel. Now, remember, Lebanon was always thought with the cedars
trees,
of Lebanon
right?
and all that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was always thought to be very productive and beautiful and stuff like that. So the glory of Lebanon will be given to it, the majesty of Carmel and Sharon. Now, remember, Carmel is usually Mount Carmel, and Mount Carmel has got trees and stuff like that on it. So it's saying this dry land is going to blossom forth.
Because if it takes the glory of Lebanon, it's
Yeah.
a producer. It
Yeah,
produces
yeah.
trees
And
that
it's gonna
are
be
of high
beautiful.
value, and yeah.
Yep. And then Sharon is the along the coast is the plain of Sharon, and that always gets the rain first. So as
Oh,
it comes across,
yeah.
it's getting the rain.
Yeah.
So it's a beautiful picture of just talking about how blessed this and how restored this land is going to be.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now, so that's the first part, and then look at verse 3 and 4. Encourage the exhausted and strengthen the feeble. Say to those anxious of heart, take courage, fear not. Behold, your God will come with vengeance and recompense. For God will come, but He will save you. Here's the part. So remember earlier, vengeance was on their enemies and the world and all that, but God's gonna even though that vengeance is coming, He's going to save His people. So that's where this restoration. So you've got the land blossoming, His people being protected. So that's
Yeah.
basically what it's trying to tell you. And then verse 4 through 10 is just a beautiful picture of that. So I'll start at verse 5. Then the eyes of the blind will be opened, the ears of the deaf will be unstopped. The lame will leap like a deer, the tongue of the mute will shout for joy. For waters will break forth in the wilderness, and streams in the Arabah, and scorched land will become a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water. So you can see what's happening. All these things that were a mess or destroyed or stuff like that, now is going to be restored. And I think it's beautiful. Not only the land, but the people too, because the blind are going to be able to see.
Yeah, that's true. Right.
The lame are going to leap for joy like a deer.
Yeah.
So those kind of images are now being brought forward to explain what's going to happen to this.
Yeah. It's a total...
reversal and
Yeah.
and look at verse 6. A highway will be there, a roadway. It would be called the highway of holiness. So that gives us another idea. Once again, I'm sure it's an image, but it's talking about that the righteous people are going to be there.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's, and look at verse 9. No lion will be there, nor any vicious beast will go on it. There will not be found there, but the redeemed will walk there. And the redeemed of the Lord will return and come with joyful shouting to Zion, with everlasting joy upon their heads. They will find gladness and joy. So I don't know if you know that, but that's repeated twice. We're going to see it again in chapter 51:11.
Oh.
That same exact refrain.
Which part? With the
that verse 10, and the ransom of the Lord will return.
Really?
Yeah, the whole thing is found in chapter 51:11 also.
No, I thought that was interesting because we've talked a lot about returns.
Yeah.
People being
shipped
off and then coming back. But this also seems like, well, maybe you can tell me then. Like, is this a specific kind of return and restoration, or is this a more big picture?
I think it's specific. I think it's going to happen when the earth after the earth has been punished, and then it gets restored. So I think it's given us that structure, and then after that, the redeemed are coming back.
Yeah.
So remember, we kind of have that picture all the way through the book of Isaiah, that there's going to come a judgment, then there's going to be a restoration, and that restoration is going to be God's people, and he's going to take care of them. We had it chapter 2, chapter 4. Both of those had that image of that future time when God's going to restore. Now, what I think is interesting, notice it talks about Zion. Jerusalem usually, when we find that in the biblical text and often in Isaiah, it's more talking about the political capital.
Yeah.
But when it's talking about Zion, it's talking about the religious capital.
Yeah.
And my understanding is what this is talking about is the people of God are going to return to Zion, meaning to God, and he's going to be ruling over them. But it always is connected with Zion. So even though the world is going to be destroyed, they're still going to go up to Zion and return to Zion.
Yeah.
My understanding is that that's where God will be. He'll be dwelling in Zion, but he's going to be dwelling over the whole world. So my guess is that if you wanted to go see where God was, or you wanted to go ask him a question, you'd head to Zion.
Yeah.
Other than that, you're in a blessed world. So I would say that the blessing would extend to everywhere, all over the creation.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I wanted to point out that almost always they're going to connect it with Zion, and that's giving you the idea that this is God's restoration that he's bringing out.
Right. Right.
Well, we just made it through chapter 35.
That's good. Yeah. Yeah. We've done a couple really long episodes.
Yeah.
So we're trying to shorten them a little bit. But that was a pretty good chunk of scripture, I think, to hit. So what are we looking towards next time?
Okay. Next time, we've got the last part. Oh, here, let me see if I can find our palistrophe. So here's, okay, we've gotten all the way to the final restoration, or judgment and restoration in 34 and 35. Then we go into the Isaianic narratives. And remember, we already know it's going to talk about the destruction of Assyria.
Yeah.
And so it's centered in on 701 when God punished them.
Okay.
So that's what we'll cover next time.
Okay, that's good. Chapter 36, 37, 38, and 39.
Yep.
That's some pretty good homework.
Yeah.
I think that's really good homework.
Yeah.
Okay, well then let's do that. Let's focus on that for next time. And
maybe I should ask, or
Yeah, sure.
have you look at one more thing.
Yeah, let's do it.
There's actually, I call them a seam.
Yeah, we haven't talked about seams for a little bit.
Yeah, that's because this major section, you have one at the very end.
Yeah.
But this one, I think, is one of the bigger seams. There's two places where you have these major seams. One's at the end of chapter 36 through 39, end of what they usually call the beginning, Isaiah 1 through 39, which is often called First Isaiah.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't use that term
Yeah.
notice it's right at the end of that first section. Then the next one is going to be at the end of the second section. So that's going to have another large seam in it. You'll still have the same ideas in it, but it's just going to be spread out through a bigger area. So you're still going to have a restoration, going to have a wicked, or the remnant saved, and the wicked are going to be punished.
Okay.
So you still got that idea, but it's just sprayed out.
And where do we need to be looking for that? Chapter 37, is that right?
Yeah, 37, we'll talk about the restoration, because that's when God steps in to deliver them. The wicked punished will be more towards the beginning, like 36 talks, they're actually destroyed in 37, because that's when God sends his angel and they wipe out 185,000 of the soldiers.
Yeah.
It's basically all the way from 36 on, because it's talking about here's the Assyrian boasting about how great he is and mocking their God. And then the answer is going to be 37, about 36 through 38, where God actually punishes them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, are we ready? Yeah.
Yeah, 36 to 39 for
Yep.
the next episode. Read up, read well, and be sure you join us next time as we continue to study Isaiah.
Thank you.